And I'll change the view. Okay, so we are picking up with chapter 6 now. We're on, if you have the Eitz Chaim Chumash, page 33. And we get this very strange story, uh, really peculiar, very mythological, and probably something that is as much a part of ancient Mesopotamia as it is of the Bible itself. It doesn't, it seems like more of a legend than something that happened, but it does set some of the scene for the flood. So we're looking at chapter 6, again on page 33. And when men, or Ha'adam, the man, but men, began to increase on the earth, um, and it's larov, greatly, and then they had daughters, right? And the B'nai Elohim saw the daughters. So here it's translated as divine beings. It's not really so clear what B'nai Elohim means. Literally, of course, it means the sons of God, but that the Hebrew word ben is used in a variety of ways. So, for example, a member of your household is a ben bayit, right? Not necessarily a son, right? It connotes a certain belonging. Um, so these are creatures that belong with God. They are part of the divine realm rather than the earthly realm. And we know that God is considered to have a sort of an honor guard around angels, beings, other things. And these seem to be part of that. At any rate, they look down and they see these daughters of men, ki tovot hena, that they are beautiful. And this actually has a little bit of resonance with what Eve saw when she saw the fruit in the garden. She saw that it was good. There was a sense of desire there, a sense of attraction. And there's something about the word and illicit attraction. She wasn't supposed to eat the fruit. She sees it, it's beautiful, she desires it. And here too, these B'nai Elohim saw them and they take them, right? They take for themselves these women as wives, the ones Asher Baharu, the one they chose, right? And God does not like this. And God says, my breath shall not abide in man forever, since he too is flesh, and therefore let the years allowed to him be 120 years. So the consequence of these relationships is that God wants to limit and we saw all these very, very long ages, right? Hundreds and hundreds of years. God says, no more. Human beings are capped at 120 years. And you have a sense that perhaps otherwise the offspring of these beings might even be immortal. Why does God now feel I better limit the longevity of human beings? And this, of course, is the basis for the famous expression in Hebrew, you wish someone a happy birthday, ad mea ve'esrim, to 120. That is to the absolute limit of a human life. And not coincidental that Moses, at the end of his life, is 120 years old. Not only 120 years old, but he has all of his faculties, right? So here, as a result of this, or coincidentally, but it seems like a result, God is limiting human lives. And now we also learn something about these offspring. It was then and later too that the Nephilim appeared on earth. Now, who are the Nephilim?
Yeah.
They seem to be the offspring of these divine beings. The word nafal literally means it is fallen, perhaps fallen from the divine status, but yet connected to it. And who are these Nephilim, which appear when the divine beings cohabited with the daughter of men who bore them offspring? They were the heroes of old, men of renown. So this idea that there was perhaps a race of giants, heroic figures, seems to be hinted at here. We get one reference to Nephilim later on in the story of the scouts that Moses sends into the land, this very ill-fated mission where they're sent in to scout out the land, and they come back and they say it's beautiful, but it's a death trap for us. Why? There are Nephilim there, right? These heroes of old, these powerful figures. And we looked at them and we felt like we were grasshoppers and they were giants. Right? So that's the only other place in the Torah where we get this mention. I also want to mention one other thing about the Hebrew here. It says, Yavohu b'nei ha'Elohim el habanot. It's the Hebrew is translated they cohabited with, but actually Yavo is to go into. It's a much cruder term than what we usually think of. When we think about the Bible, you say Adam knew his wife, right? This is something else. There is a sense not only of extreme desire on the part of these demigods, but also, I don't know if you'd call it rape, but there's something not quite right about it. At any rate, that's all we know about them. That's all we know about this ancient scene. And now, though, this seems to be emblematic, perhaps if you want to see this in those sort of crude terms, emblematic of what's going on elsewhere on earth. And so we are in chapter 6, now looking at verse, here we go, that's better, verse 5. And God saw how great man's wickedness was. Ki rabbah ra'at ha'adam. Right, it had multiplied, it's great, it's huge. And what is huge? The the badness of human beings. Remember the tree of good and bad. Well, they seem to have chosen the bad side of it, evil side of it. And kol yetzer machshavot libo rak ra kol hayom. And how every plan devised by their yetzer, devised in their heart by their Yetzer, is bad, continues. So this word Yetzer, which is translated, not really translated here so much. Yetzer, of course, is from the root Yatsar, which is a root to create, right? God created human beings in God's image, using that word. So according to rabbinic tradition, we as created beings have within us two Yetzers, right? The Yetzer Hatov and the Yetzer Hara. Good inclination, evil inclination. It's almost as if we have an angel on one shoulder and a devil on the other. Right? So It's the good inclination is not in the picture, right? People, everything they think about, everything that is in their heart is evil all day long. And so people are irredeemably bad. And then we get in verse 6 a very striking statement. V'nachem Adonai ki asa et Adam. And God regrets that God made human beings. So the idea of God regretting seems very strange, right? I mean, how is it that God, who knows everything, the creator, the all-knowing creator, could regret something? Didn't God know what was going to happen? Why did God do it at all if God was going to regret it? And the answer here, I think, is God doesn't know what's going to happen, at least in terms of human beings, because human beings have free will. And that's how God created us. So we are in the divine image. We do know good from bad, but we are not intrinsically good. And in fact, we have that quality, that evil within us, which we can choose to ignore or override. Remember the story of Cain and Abel, which we looked at, where God says to Cain, sin crouches at the door, but you can rule over it. Right? They're not doing that. Right? And so their evil inclination has captured them, and God regrets what God has done. And Vayit atsev el libo, it's translated as he was saddened, but I don't think that's actually a good translation because this is a certain nuance. If you look back to Adam and Eve in the garden, in the story we studied, and in how God curses them, Eve's curse is ba'itz ba'on, with pain, she will bring children into the world. And Adam is told that he will earn his bread painfully, difficultly, right? So this is not merely God being saddened. It's a much stronger word than this. God is pained. I think there is this sense of, I mean, how does God feel? Created this world, and instead of being Tov Ma'od, which is what God declared it to be at the end of creation, it's Ra Kol Hayom. It's throughout, every day is just evil. And so one gets a sense not of sadness, but of betrayal, loathing, very strong emotion. And so what does God say? Emche et ha'adam asher barati. I will erase, right, from the earth the man that I have created, and that is to say humanity, and from the man to the beasts, to the creeping things and the birds of the sky. Why? And again, ki nichamti ki asita. I regret that I have made them. So here God is now vowing to destroy all of creation. We're going to see it in a minute. Of course, it's not quite all. And we get just the slightest hint of that here, and then we will see it much more laid out in a minute. V'Noach matzah chen be'enei Adonai. But Noach found favor in the eyes of God. So Noach, we had just been introduced to at the end of that genealogy, before the story of these demigods and the women of earth, and now we're coming back to him, and we know that he's the only one that God, likes, who doesn't seem to be completely corrupted. In a minute, we're going to go on now and actually read the story of the flood. Before we do, we change the view. Questions, comments about anything up to this point before we jump in? Go ahead, Sandy.
So, you said that people should know good from bad. I'm just wondering if God gave instructions, and if God did not give the people instructions, then maybe they didn't know. And then after the flood, God maybe learned that they need instructions and gave those Noahide laws.
I think the idea here is that human beings intrinsically know the difference between good and bad. That is, as once they eat from the apple or the fruit, or just in general, there's this notion in philosophy called natural law, and it essentially posits that there are certain things that every human being, as a human being, knows. Right? You look across cultures, you look across societies, there are certain things that people seem to know. And the assumption here is that, not murdering, not grabbing from someone what doesn't belong to you, all those sorts of things sort of are intrinsic to the idea of distinguishing them seems to be intrinsic to being human. And I think that's the assumption here. God will actually make compromises. You mentioned the 7 Noahide laws, but understand that that is a completely rabbinic construction. They take verses here in the story of Genesis itself, before we get to the flood, and verses that refer to Noah, and they derive from them these 7 laws, but they're not here in the text. It's really it's what's called midrash halacha, right? It's a midrash, but it's a halachic midrash, and I don't think that we can say that those laws are really here. And even in the rabbinic imagination, what would that mean? Who would teach them? How would that work? Right? I think what the rabbis are saying, and they use texts because that's the way they do it, is the same thing I'm saying. There's certain basic human things that people should know and should be accountable for if they don't do them. Okay. Anything else? Yeah. Anything else before we move on, Hannah?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I was a bit late. Can you tell me what pages we're on?
Yeah, sure.
Where are we exactly?
We are about to move on to chapter 6, verse 9, page 41.
41.
Okay. Matthew, did you have a question or you're just scratching?
Just scratching.
And it's good
Nice to see you.
Yeah, it's been a while. It's good to see you. Okay, so let's go on now and get into the story. First, verse 9, Ela Toldot Noah. This is the line of Noah. Toldot is, as I mentioned before, it's a word with a variety of meanings. One is genealogy, right? This is the line of Noah, and we're going to see the names of his sons in a minute. Those are the same names that we saw last week at the end of the genealogy, right? Shem, Ham, and Japheth. But this also, Toldot also means the story of. And we saw that in the account in Genesis at the end of creation, where it says, this is the Toldot of the heaven and the earth as they were made, right? So the story of, or the genealogy of, and now we get this phrase about Noah. He was Ish Tzaddik Tamim B'dorotav. He was a tzaddik, right? A righteous man. Tamim, which I'll come back to in a minute, and this quality of being a tzaddik and a tamim, he was in his generation, right? That is the generation of the flood. So tzaddik, of course, we more or less have an idea of what that means, right? To be a tzaddik is to do the right thing all the time, right? Tamim, it's translated here as blameless. Sometimes the word pure is used. Sometimes tam also means simple. And I remind you of the Passover Seder, as one of the sons is a tam, singular of tamim. Jacob is called Ishtam Yoshev Ohalim, a tam who dwells in tents. So it seems to be one of the interpretations I like is simple in his faith, or, without blemish, his record is unblemished. Whatever it actually means, right? These are great accolades. But then we get the end of the description, which is Bedorotav, in his generation. And of course, that may change everything. Because it simply could have read, Noah was a righteous and blameless man. Noah walked with God. So why do we have to be told in his generation? And there's a great rabbinic debate about this. One point of view is, yeah, relative to the no goodniks of that generation, yeah, he was righteous. But had he lived in the time of Abraham, not so much. That's one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at it is he was righteous despite his generation. He lived in a place where there was corruption surrounding him, where it would be extremely difficult to be righteous. Nonetheless, he was righteous. So is he being praised? Is he being denigrated? Completely unclear. Is this absolute or relative? We'll maybe have some hints that he's not such a great guy later on. But for now, what's important is that, and then we get this statement, Hitalech Noah. Noah walked with God. It's not quite clear what that means. Later on, Abraham is told, walk before me, God says, and be tamim. What does it mean he walked with God? He was close to God. He walked the walk. He didn't just talk the talk. It's really hard to figure out exactly what that means. Take a look just for a minute. Going back just for 1 second. Nah, I don't see it. Okay.
Rabbi,
Yeah,
are you looking for Enoch walked with God?
yes, Enoch walks.
It's Genesis 5:24.
Yeah, he also walks with God.
Okay, sorry, I thought that's what you were looking for.
So, and that's actually what I was looking for. Yeah, so he also walks with God. In that context, we get him as a kind of mystical being. And as I mentioned, there are books listed in the Apocrypha all about him, and his travels to heaven and so on. I don't get a sense that that's what this means. Noah is very earthly here, right? So I think it has to do with, walking the right path, but it's anyone's guess, really.
Is the Hebrew the same? The
Uh,
Hebrew walked with God.
I think so, but Hitalech Noah, and let's look at what you
5:24.
24.
Hitpael. It's reflexive.
Yeah, 5:24. Let's just look at it. Yeah. Yeah, okay, so yeah. Yeah, I'm just seeing if there's any. Yeah, it's pretty much the same thing.
Thank you.
The structure of the sentence is a little bit different, but it's really the same words. So here we go. At any rate, what's happened to the world? We heard that God was unhappy, that people were evil from their youth. Well, that reminds me of something I didn't mention that I wanted to mention. This idea that people are evil from their youth, in other words, their whole lives. I think it's worth mentioning the fact, I might have mentioned this before, but this idea that children are somehow, pure, uh, innocent, and what have you, is not at all the Jewish conception of childhood. The idea that people, everyone, including children, has an evil inclination. You could even argue that children have a little bit more of an evil inclination because they're selfish. You look, mine, right? They're in their own world. They don't recognize other people as having needs. They see other people in a very utilitarian way. Once that's the purpose of education. That's the purpose of the parents, to help them to put aside that not childish innocence, but selfishness and so on. And then ultimately they become a bar mitzvah, and they are then accountable themselves for their actions. Okay, just an aside. So what happened to the world? Tishachet haaretz lifnei Elohim. The world became corrupt before God, and timaleh haaretz Hamas. The world was filled with Hamas. It's an ironic fact that Hamas here is evil and corruption, and of course we know there's another Hamas in the world, and they are also deeply evil, but purely coincidental. The idea of the world being filled, Timalei haaretz Hamas, reminds us of what God said to Adam and Eve. Pru or vu or mulea ta'aretz, right? Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. That was God's command to them. And what happened? They filled, if you will, the earth with Hamas, with corruption. And God saw the earth and saw that how deeply corrupted it was, that all flesh had corrupted it. And this question is, what does all flesh mean here? There is a sense in this text that, it's not just human beings, it's everything. As it were, the animals also have become corrupt. The Midrash is filled with stories about animals going with other animals, animals with people, all kinds of stories to kind of fill out this picture. Not clear at all what it means. And in some sense, I think they're just trying to deal with the question of how could it be that these animals, which didn't do anything, they too will lose their lives in this enormous slaughter. At any rate, God says, I'm going to destroy the earth. And God says to Noah, Kate's called Basar Ba'alefanai, the end of all flesh has come before me. I see it, there's a sense in which it's already happened. This is not a decision that God is consulting Noah about. It's not giving God an opportunity to argue. Remember what Abraham does at Sodom and Gomorrah? He argues with God. God says, I'm going to destroy the cities. We'll see it eventually. And Abraham says, well, if there are 50 righteous people, will you spare the city for the sake of the 50, right? All the people for the sake of 50. And they negotiate. It's like being in the market. 50, 45, 40, 30, they get down to 10, it's over, right? Noah does not do that. And you could say, well, that's part of the reason why he's only a righteous man in his own generation. Or maybe it has to do just with the language here, that it's translated, I have decided to put, but the Hebrew is it's come before me, right? As though I've made a decision. Abraham thinks God might be open to something, and indeed, God is open. There's a negotiation. Um, okay, why? Ki malaha aretz Hamas. The world is filled with lawlessness because of them, and therefore I am about to mashchit et kol haaretz. The word here, mashchit, destroy, is also the word that's used for what the people did to the earth, himshit, right? This is an example of the Torah's using, it's sort of, in Hebrew, it's called midah keneged midah, measure for measure. You get punished in the way that you sinned, right? It's a consistent theme throughout the Torah. To give you one quick example, which we also will see one day, right? So Jacob steals his brother's birthright. And ultimately, he flees from his brother, and he winds up going and becoming part of the family of Lavan. He falls in love with Lavan's daughter Leah, and he wants to marry her. And as you know, probably, Lavan tricks him, and he winds up not with Rachel, who he loves, but with her sister Leah. And when Jacob goes to Lavan and he says, "What have you done to me?" Lavan says, "Oh no, we do not put the younger before the older." Right? Well, that's exactly what Jacob had done by taking himself, the younger, and getting the birthright for him, stealing it from his father. So that notion of what goes around comes around, constant through the text. We'll see other examples of it. And here it's just in the language itself, right? I am going to destroy that which they have destroyed. And therefore, God says, Asalacha teva atze gofer kinim. So make yourself a teva. The word teva is used several times in the Torah. Here it's translated as ark, which seems to be right. It's a vessel. Two other places where you see it. Moses is placed in a teva when his mother puts him into the Nile because she's afraid for his life, right? The teva is what will keep him alive and ultimately bring salvation to the Jewish people. Here, the teva is what's going to keep this remnant of life alive and bring them back to earth, a kind of salvation also. And the last use of teva is the ark in which the tablets are placed. Right? Inside the Mishkan is called the teva. It is, and I guess we call the ark today the teva. We call it Aron Kodesh, which is a holy cupboard, but it's also a teva. Okay, so he says you're going to make a teva, make it with compartments, not one big boat. It's got rooms in it because all the animals are going to go in there, and he's going to go in there, and make it out of gopher wood and cover it inside and out with pitch, right? This is ancient boat construction. Gopher wood was used in antiquity, in ancient times for boats. The idea of covering it with pitch, well known from ancient Mesopotamia and other ways. So there's nothing novel about the materials themselves. Make a seaworthy vessel. And now God says, and this is how you do it. And this is striking to me, right? He could just say, do it. But we're getting now exact dimensions of how big it should be, how many amot it is. So in amah, which is one of the classic biblical measurements, is the distance from the middle finger to the elbow, right? It's like a foot was once a foot, right? So they use body parts to measure things. So how is he going to make this? You are going to make it 15 300 amot long, 50 amot wide, 30 amot tall, with an opening for daylight. And there will be, like, it terminated within a cubit of the top. There may be some kind of frame around the top, and put an entrance in the side and decks. It looks like a cruise ship, right? Multiple decks. So before we go on, I have to say, this is not the only flood story we have from ancient Mesopotamia, right? There's something called Emuna Elish, which is perhaps the best known of them, has a hero. The hero goes into the ark with animals, comes out again after the flood. The ark is described in those stories. Seems bigger than this one, actually. Maybe has a different shape than this one does. But it's clear that the Bible here is using very ancient materials. Now, you could say, if you wanted to, well, this is the real story of a flood that really happened, and they have their own myths about that flood. Or you could say, and I think it's much more likely to say, because I don't think this is historical, you could say that, well, there are different versions, and this is our version. And what's interesting about this version is how it differs from the other versions and what that has to teach us. So, for example, in the ancient Mesopotamian myth, they do not destroy the earth because it's become corrupt. The gods are amoral. They don't care about that in ancient Mesopotamia. They just want you to do, to feed them, to bring offerings to the altar, which they will eat. They have their reasons. I don't remember what their reason is for flooding the earth, whether, there was a battle between them or whatever it was. But it's clear that there was no moral reason for the flood. The ending is going to be quite different. But I will say, in that story and in this one, there's a raven and a dove. So there's similarities, real, not just minor similarities. We'll come back to significant differences. The first one I mentioned was that this is a moral story as opposed to an amoral story. At the end, I'll come back to some other things as well. Okay, so God tells him how to do it. And then God says, Hineni va'ani, Hineni, but I, or for I, will bring a flood, waters on the earth, to destroy all flesh under the sky in which there is the breath of life. Everything on earth will perish. So this is how God's going to do it. There's going to be a flood, and it's a very strong statement. Kol basar asher bo ruach chayim. All flesh which is within it the breath of life, or the spirit of life. But I will establish my covenant with you, and you will enter the ark with your sons, your wife, and your son's wife. And of all lives, of all flesh, you will take 2 of each into the ark to keep alive with you. They shall be male and female, from birds of every kind, cattle of every kind of creeping thing on earth. 2 of each shall come to you to stay alive. So here we are, 2 by 2, right? The idea is these animals, along with Noah's family, will be able to reproduce and will be able to replenish the earth. And so this is not a total destruction. This is a remake, right? This is an attempt to fix what went wrong last time. God has not given up on humanity, despite how painful it is, but God wants to start over again. The metaphor I like for this, because my wife works in clay, is that when you make a pot and you're not happy with it, you don't fire it, you smush it all back down and use the clay to remake it, right? That's kind of what's going on here. Okay. And not only that, but not only does Noah have all this to do, but he has to get food for everybody, right? And store that away. Now, how is all this going to work? It seems utterly impossible. And I think it is. And I think it's a myth meant to teach us something. Can you imagine the stench? Can you imagine trying to feed all those animals? Can you imagine every species somehow fitting in there and in compartments? It's not, despite the fact that we get this description of cubits and this way and that, it's completely implausible. However, God now says, go into the ark. You know what? Let me actually, because we're going on to chapter 7, and I've done a lot. So let me just for a minute. Any questions up to this point before Noah actually makes his way into the ark? Anybody? Yeah, Saul.
I think the word teva also in the Sephardic synagogues refers to the Aron Kodesh.
There you go.
Interesting.
They get it right.
Yeah.
Thank you. Anything else? Barry, unmute. Yes,
So, yeah, so all the creatures in the ocean are somehow
right,
in that, yeah,
Right.
they're-
right. The birds are going to get knocked out of the sky, right? And they're going to have nowhere to land. But the creatures in the ocean, the flood's going to do nothing to them.
right,
And so are the other animals all corrupt and they're not?
yeah, and so then,
Yeah.
yeah, and well, the other thing is, it's not clear how Noah chooses the pairs of animals.
Right. I mean, the whole thing, Right.
They're corrupt.
right. And how is he going to do it? And what is he going to go with traps and nets? And how is he getting that giraffe in there? You know, it's a story, and not the only story. Okay, let's go back. Okay, so God says to Noah, go into the ark with all your household, you alone, again, you alone I have found righteous in this generation. And now, of the pure animals, take 7 pairs, males and their men, and every animal that is not pure, a man and its mate, of the birds of the sky, 7 pairs, right, to keep seed alive on the earth. In 7 days I will make it rain. So 2 by 2? Now, no. 2 by 2 for the unclean animals, and in 7 by 7 for the clean animals. So we have 2 different traditions here. You can try to harmonize them. One classic way to do that is to say, well, when God said 2, God meant a minimum of 2. So there'll be enough, although it's hard for me to think that, that's how Noah would take it. But here, 7, what does it mean, a pure animal? It means an animal fit for sacrifice. And indeed, when Noah comes out of the ark, he's going to sacrifice. If you're going to make sacrifices, then you need more animals, because you won't have a mating pair if you only have 2 and you use 1 for a sacrifice. So that seems to be the idea here. And then in 7 days, I will make it rain upon the earth, right? 40 days and 40 nights. These are very symbolic numbers. 7, right? Completeness, wholeness. 40 is used for transition. This is going to be a period of transition from one time to the next. 400, of course, we know another period of transition, 40 days on the mountain before we get the Torah, 400 years in Egypt, 40 days and 40 nights. These are all schematic, symbolic numbers. And Noah did what God, so in 7 times I'm going to rain and blot everything out, and Noah did just as God had told him to do. And he was 600 years old when the flood came on the earth, because he was already alive before things were limited. Um, and Noah and his wife and his wife and his sons, they go into the animal and the pure animals and the animals that are not pure, everything. And on the seventh day, the waters of the flood come upon the earth, which is in the 600th year of Noah's life, the second month of the 17th day of the month, on that very day. And then we get this very poetic passages, right? Poetic parallelism. All the fountains of the deep burst apart, and the floodgates of the sky broke open. Right. So, what does it mean to say that the fountains of the deep burst apart and the floodgates open? So, remember back when the world was created, it was meaningless and waterless and void, and then God separates what's above from what's below and creates this barrier, this rakia, sky, right? So what's going to happen? And then below we have the waters, but below the waters are the depths, right? And so what God is doing here is undoing creation. That water that was all trapped up there to create sky, gates are opening, and it's going to come pouring down, and the water that was below is going to come pouring up, and everything will be erased. And the rain falls for 40 days and 40 nights. The same day, Noah and his sons went into the ark, and all the beasts of every kind. So this statement that the same day is something the rabbis play with. Why did he wait so long? In other words, it wasn't until the rain actually came that he goes into the ark. The same day it starts raining. He knew it was going to happen. God said, in 7 days, I'll flood the earth. So what's he waiting for? Depends how you want to look at Noah. He's a tzaddik, he's a good man. Maybe they will repent. Maybe if I stay out here, I can still do some good. Or, I don't know. Is God really going to do this? Am I really going to pack it all in and get in this ark? We'll see what happens. Either way, the Torah goes out of its way to say on that day, and so you have to wonder why. Okay. So, and they all go into the ark. They come to the ark, and they entered, male and female, as God had commanded, and then God shuts the ark door, right? Because they can't; they're all inside. It's got to be shut from the outside, right? And now the flood continues 40 days. The waters increase and raise and swell and increase. And they've swelled so much upon the earth, all the highest mountains everywhere under the sky were covered. 15 cubits higher did the waters swell as the mountains were covered, right? So the entire earth, this is the ultimate consequence of global warming here, and all the ice is going to melt and everything, water everywhere, up to covering the tops of the tallest mountains. And everything perishes, all in whose nostrils was the merest breath of life, all that was on dry land, all was blotted out. Only Noah was left and those who were with him in the ark. And when the waters had swelled on the earth 150 days, God remembered Noah and all the beasts. No. So this idea, God remembers, when the Bible says God remembers, where is it? Yizkor, right? The idea of Yizkor here is not forgotten about them and said, oh, hey, I left the ark floating, I better do something, right? This is more God directed God's attention now to Noah and the ark and the beasts and everything with him. And God causes a wind to blow across the earth, ruach, Ruach was used earlier in creation. Now we see it again. And the waters of the deep and the floodgates of the sky are stopped up, and the rain from the sky was held back. And then the waters recede. At the end of 150 days, they diminished. In the seventh month, on the 17th day of the month, the ark comes to rest on Mount Ararat. Now, Ararat is a known mountain, somewhere maybe in Armenia. At any rate, there are people you probably know who claim to have found the remnants of the ark there on Mount Ararat. That, of course, is ridiculous because the whole story is just one of many. And however, so they say, at any rate, after 40 days, now Noah opens the window of the ark that he had made, not the door, but the window, and he sends out a raven, and it goes to and fro on the earth, and then he sends out the dove to see if the waters had decreased. So the raven is a bird of prey. There are all those carcasses out there. So the raven goes out. The raven's okay. He sends out the dove. Dove needs to be able to put its feet down. No resting place for the dove. Returns to the ark, for there is water over the earth. And so he's a really nice image. He stretches out his hand, takes the dove back in, waits another week, sends it out again, and it comes back towards evening, and there's an olive leaf in its bill. So the water has now receded so that the trees, this olive tree, ancient trees, now still there, and apparently the salt water didn't hurt him. At any rate, he comes back with the branch, and Noah knows, and he waits another seventh day, and he sends the dove again, and now the dove doesn't come back. So in the 601st year, in the first month, on the first of the month, the waters began to dry. And when he removed the covering of the ark, he saw the surface of the ground was drying. And in the second month, on the 27th day of the month, the earth was dry. And God says to him, come out and bring everybody with you. And Noah comes out together with his wife, his sons, wives, every animal, every creeping thing comes out. And what does Noah do? He builds an altar, taking of every pure animal and bird, and offers burnt offerings on the altar. And God smells the pleasing odor and says, never again will I doom the earth because of man, since the dividing of man's heart are evil from his youth, nor will I ever destroy every living being as I have done. So once again, we get divine regret, right? In this case, God regrets having done it. And more than that, he sees these human beings come out of the ark. The first thing they do is make an offering, right? There is a connection. God doesn't want to lose that connection. Then we get this lovely statement. So long as the earth endures, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night will not cease. This is a divine promise. So we'll pick up the story next time. I do want to say one more thing about this, and that goes back to the ancient Babylonian flood myth. The end of the story is that the guy in the ark there too comes out and offers a sacrifice. And the gods, it says, cluster around the meat like maggots, right? Why? Because they're starving, because they've let things get out of control. The flood was beyond their ability to control it, and they were starving because the only way they get fed is the people often offer sacrifices on an altar to them. Now, the Bible, our Bible, does not view it that way. God smells the reach nichoach, this pleasant smell. God's not eating it. God is, in some sense, getting a sense of satisfaction from human actions. Right? So the relationship, the view of God is different. The relationship between human beings and God is different. The idea that God requires a moral universe is absent. This flood story stands in counter-distinction to the other one. And I think what's important about it is not so much it's a story about a flood and a guy who goes into an ark and comes out, and makes a sacrifice. It's our story, it's our version of it, and it's consistent with the values that the Torah wants to teach us. Now, having said that, I'm going to go back. We are a little bit over, but I'm happy to answer any quick questions if there are any. Otherwise, we'll pick up next week. Oh, no class next week. We'll pick up in 2 weeks. Okay, Francesca.
This was new information for me about other flood stories. Were there very many other ones? I only know about this is the first time I've heard about other flood stories. How many others were there?
There were several.
Oh,
The one I mentioned is the most, we have the most, there are ancient clay tablets from Babylonia. That's where these things are found on. This is the most developed of them from what I recall, but there are others that are more fragmentary. Saul.
If anybody has the Hertz Chumash, these stories are at the end of the book of Breshit in detail.
Oh, good. Thank you. All right. Good. Anything else that anyone wants to mention? Now I'll have to go to shul, and I don't have a Hertz Chumash anymore, but there's some kicking around over there. So now I have to go
Right.
to meet them. Or I could just Google ancient Mesopotamia flood stories. I probably do equally well. Okay. Well, terrific. I will hope to see you all in 2 weeks. I want to wish you a really great Thanksgiving next week. And feel thankful. Don't just eat turkey or watch football, but be grateful, right? Because that's what it's really about. Okay. See you next week.
thank you. In 2
Thank you,
weeks.
Rabbi. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.